Welcome to Section 4, Video 3, Setting up our Pickup System. In this video, we are going to set up our pickup system and set up our pickup actor. Within our C++ classes in the Gameplay Elements folder, we are going to open up our pickup actor. Inside of our pickup actor, we will not be using the tick or begin play functions, so we can just delete them. And in our source file, we should also remove the tick and begin play definitions, as well as the primary tick can never tick line of code, since we won't be ticking for this actor. Here we are declaring a sphere component, which will be our collection sphere, as our root component. Then we are declaring a protected function for when this actor is collected, as well as passing in a pointer of the player's class and naming it collector. We are also making this a Blueprint native event so that we can make a Blueprint class and have it fire their own version of code that we want to occur when this actor is collected, instead of it making only C++ code occur. Finally, we created a private function for when the collection sphere overlaps or enters the overlap for something that can overlap it. The reason for the large amount of input parameters is because when something is supposed to overlap another actor or component, it is called via a delegate. And a delegate is like a sort of connection between the functions that can be changed or fired, etc. So if we have a delegate for when the player jumps, then we can say when the player jumps, call a function that spawns a cube or rotates an object or whatever. And basically we can remap any function that has the same return type and input parameters for that specific delegate. So when the player jumps or something, we want to rotate a cube, and we have to input a rotator. And that's all we need to know, is the function has to have an input for a rotator only, and that's it. And we can just bind it to that and just fire off the delegate, and we don't have to explicitly call that function. Whenever you need to bind a function or delegate, you must have the ufunction macro above it, or else it will not work. Even if it has nothing within the ufunction's parameters, it must have the above function, or else the compiler will not recognize it and throw an error. We will look at how delegates are set up momentarily. Now let's create our implementations of our functions for the onCollection implementation and onSphere overlap. The word implementation and definition are used in the same sort of context for most programmers. Inside of our source file, we are including the libraries for our player and the sphere component, since we are going to use these libraries within this class. Here we are setting up our root component to be our collection sphere component, while also creating that subobject within one line of code. Then we are setting the collision response to ignore all channels first, and then after that we are setting the collision response to only overlap with pawns, and makes it easier for the physics system to register less actors going through it at once. Then we are binding that delegate to our onSphere overlap function, and now if we right click on the onComponentBegin overlap, which is the delegate, and select go to definition, it will bring us to the primitive components header file within the engine, and we can actually select the fComponentBegin overlap signature, which is the actual delegate's sort of class or macro, highlight it, and select Control F on your keyboard. And this will show up any sort of references or when it's been called or used within this whole file. And in this case, it was used on line 145, and this is our delegate, which is a Unreal specific macro that has been created by the compiler to register this sort of stuff, where it will look for anything with this sort of signature as the name of this delegate, and in this case it takes in 6 parameters. And each parameter has to have the class type or input type, and then the name of that input, which in this case is uPrimitiveComponent pointer, and then the name of that sort of input, which would be the overlapped component. And we could actually highlight all of this, copy it, and then go into our header file, and when we're declaring our function, just paste it into the parameters, and then remove the commas in between each of the class types or input types, and then the name of that, but we don't remove it past the name of the input type. When we're doing the add dynamic, it is something within the Unreal Engine specific macros that allow us to bind a function that has the same sort of inputs as the onComponentBegin overlaps signature needs. We're inputting a object, and then we're inputting the function that should be within this object as a direct reference using the AND symbol. Here we are just going to destroy this actor when we call the parent function within Blueprint for onCollected, because we won't be doing anything else within C++ for this actor when it is collected. Here we are using the input parameter of the other actor from our function, and we are casting for the player class, and then saving it as the player, checking to see if it's valid, and then calling the onCollection function, and then passing in that player. If it's not valid, then we aren't collected, and then it will just move on. Let's save all, select build, and rebuild the project. In the next video, we are going to create our pickups.